Hello, and thank you for listening to South Fork Law. My name is Jill Bernstein. I'm a retired criminal defense attorney, and I'm joined by my co-host, Doug Hildahl from the law firm of Lester and Hildahl, and Dave Nelson from the law office of David A. Nelson. Both Doug and Dave have criminal defense practices, although Dave also handles some municipal court prosecutions. All three of us are passionate about justice, and we're anxious to use our time on the radio to inform the community about the justice system. Tonight it will be just Doug Hildahl and myself, as Dave is actually off in court in a jury trial, and so he's off pursuing justice while the two of us have the pleasure of talking with our very special guest, Chief Clifford Cook, Chief of the Bellingham Police Department. Welcome, Chief Cook.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
Well, Chief, you've been with the Bellingham Police Department a short time, is that right?
22 months.
And before coming to Bellingham, can you tell our listeners a little bit about what your professional career looked like?
Sure. I began my career in 1976 in a suburban Detroit police department, Lincoln Park, Michigan. Small community of about 30,000, blue collar, mostly auto and steel workers. Went to school there, grew up there, was hired by the police department there. Spent 5.5 years with that agency, worked patrol, worked traffic, that sort of thing, and did some undercover narcotics work, in fact, in southeastern Michigan for a period. I left that department in 1981. I went to Fort Worth, Texas. Spent 25 years with that.
That's a pretty big shift, a cultural shift from Detroit, suburban Detroit, to Texas.
Huge difference.
Wow. All right. So you went from Michigan to Texas.
Yes, I did. And 25 years with that agency. Went through the ranks. Spent some time as a homicide detective, a crime scene investigator. Was a patrol lieutenant under a new chief of police that came from Los Angeles that brought community policing to that department. Left there in 2007 as a deputy chief to take the chief's job in Vancouver, Washington. 5.5 years there. Pretty challenging experience in southwestern Washington with that community. And then actually retired 2012. Was trying to think about what I was going to do. I had done some teaching. I was an adjunct professor for a university for 8 years.
Teaching criminology?
No, I was teaching leadership, undergraduate program. And then one of your ex-chiefs, who I knew from my time in Vancouver, who was the director of WASPIC, Don Pierce, called me and said that Chief Ramsey was going to retire, and he said, I really don't think you're ready to retire. You might want to take a look at the community and the department and maybe throw your hat in the ring. So my wife and I did. We traveled up here past Bellingham on 5 going to Vancouver, BC, but never actually been in Bellingham, and came up twice, applied, went through the process. Mayor Linville hired me in 2013.
Well, what attracted you in the beginning to a career in law enforcement?
I think the best way for me to describe that is I didn't have an attraction to a career in law enforcement. In fact, I graduated from high school, worked at Ford Motor for a while on the line to make money to go to college, and was enrolled in basically a biology program with the intent on going to medical school. And I actually got into law enforcement on a dare.
What did the dare look like?
I had a couple friends I went to high school with. Both played football, pretty big guys, 6'2", 6'4". I was 5'11" and weighed 145 pounds. A little thinner than I am now. And the police department in our community had advertised that they were giving a test, and my buddies were talking about it, and they were going to apply, and they said, why don't you go with us? And I said, well, I don't think I'm big enough, first of all. Police officers in that day tended to be pretty big. And my buddy Rich said, well, I bet you can't pass the test. Wrong thing to say to me. So long story short, I took the test, went through the full polygraph, psychological interviews with the police commission, and I got placed on the waiting list at 19. I was too young to hire, actually. I had to wait till I was 21. So I changed my major, much to my mother's disappointment, and here I am.
Well, what would you describe as being sort of the highlights of your career? What things have you enjoyed most? You've done a lot of different things in different communities.
I think the two areas of my career that stand out for me particularly was my time as a homicide detective. You're asked to investigate cases that are traumatic for everyone involved, the victim's family, the community, and at that time, Fort Worth had a very high crime rate and a very high homicide rate. We were within the top 10 in the country, and we were about the 32nd largest city in this country. And the other aspect I liked about it was that I got to put my crime scene experience to work, but I also got to feel as if I was doing something for the victim's family when I was able to solve a case and make an arrest, and then through the criminal justice system see a successful prosecution and see that family reach some closure to that tragedy in their lives. I felt like I was really making a huge difference. I didn't stay with that position very long. I was encouraged to promote, and I did. And so the second most, I guess, interesting or rewarding part of my career was I was a lieutenant, and I was asked to head one of 3 pilot policing districts with a very strong community policing outlook and approach to how we provided services. And I had 3 housing projects in that division. I was responsible for the downtown business district, which was being revitalized. So it was a pretty strong cross-section of the community as well as income brackets. During the day, the city had over 30,000 people downtown, and at night they were gone, and we were dealing with issues in the housing projects. And through that programming, we were able to accomplish some things in those housing project communities with some of the young people and turn the crime rate around in those communities, which had been heavily influenced by the crack cocaine issues and problems of the day. So those are probably the 2 most rewarding aspects of my career.
Well, there must have been something, though, that sparkled about Bellingham to pull you out of retirement and bring you here. What was it?
The department's reputation, primarily. The nature, I guess the better yet said, the philosophy behind the department's attitude towards how they serve the community.
Before you got here, you were in Vancouver,
Yes.
Washington?
Mm-hmm.
And I think you indicated that was in some ways challenging.
It was.
Is that something that you can tell us about?
Sure. Yeah.
Okay.
We were, although many of the people that lived in Vancouver won't readily admit it, we were part of the Portland metro area.
Seems fairly obvious.
Yeah, you would think so, but that river creates this kind of mental picture that we're not part of it, but we did experience a lot of crime from there, gang issues from there. Vancouver, as you might know, doubled in size at one point. Prior to my arrival, they did one of the largest annexations in the state of Washington and went from, I think, 13th largest city to 4 overnight. So there were some growth issues and then obviously some catching up that the police department had to do. So they did some extensive hiring and hired from outside the community. A lot of officers from Southern California. When I got there, it was the department seemed to have minimal connection with the community they served. It was I had a resident say to me, they don't seem to understand their role. They appear to have more of I'm here for my 8-hour shift, and then I go home and I live outside the community and I have no connections to the community. And that's not an entirely true description, but it was some of the perceptions that the citizen had. We, after I'd been there about a year and a half, started some community policing programs, a citizens volunteer program, a neighborhood police officer program, expanded some of our outreach to youth through a police activities league that had already been in place, but it wasn't growing as fast as we would like it to. So I was making some differences, I think, and the men and women who were helping me make that difference, I felt were getting a lot more out of the experience of being officers there. The difficult part and the challenge was there was a very strong reticence within the union with that police department about how change would occur. And I guess to give you an idea of the atmosphere, in the prior 18 years prior to my arrival, there had been 9 chiefs of police.
Say that again. What period of time?
In the 18 years prior to my
9
arrival, there had been
chiefs?
9
Oh,
chiefs.
gee.
One every
is-
2 years.
Well, actually,
Average.
one lasted a month, and one lasted a little over 3 years. Well, the longest serving was just under 5. So you didn't, and I could understand what had happened. There was lack of consistent leadership, consistent direction for the agency. So the officers turned to their union for that kind of stability. And because of that influx of so many chiefs in and out of the department, it was kind of the next one won't be here long either. So I don't
Right.
think they were really invested in their chiefs.
After that, you come to Bellingham. Is Bellingham different than that?
Yeah, far, far different.
Tell us about it.
Well, first of all, the attitude of the officers, they have it's going to sound a little corny, I guess, but they still have this strong sense of service, in my opinion.
That's not corny.
Well, some
Isn't that the
people might-
mission?
That is our mission, but I think a lot of departments across the country have lost that attitude. It's very much an us versus them attitude, or in those cases where there is a greater amount of interaction with the community in a positive way. It doesn't seem to get the recognition that it should, so consequently officers focus on career paths and types of assignment and that sort of thing. The community drew us because obviously it's a diverse community in innumerable ways. There seemed to be a greater level of, I don't know, I'd call it compassion. Could call it tolerance, but I don't like the term. I think it's more about compassion and having the ability to understand that people are different, but that doesn't mean they're different from us in the respect that we're still human beings. We're still people that have wants and desires and goals in our lives and want to enjoy life in a variety of different ways. But and it's our responsibility as public servants to ensure that that environment exists for that to occur.
Well, so that's what drew you here was that idea, that was the ethos in the community. And so what are you hoping to be able to change or do differently with our police department as the chief?
Well, we've already done some things, and I think some of these things are nothing new. Some I've brought with me, and they're programs that I've been successful with elsewhere. Vancouver's a good example, Fort Worth. Some of the other things are...
Well, like what?
Well, I'd like to see a citizens volunteer patrol program here. I've successfully implemented one in Vancouver from no program at all and was very successful in helping develop a program in Fort Worth from its initial start. And it's not a vigilante.
But what would
type.
they do?
Primarily, it's to focus on their own neighborhoods. To one thing, get out and walk their neighborhoods in a way with some training from us on how to recognize what contributes to crime as far as environment design or lack of lighting, what looks suspicious to the average person, what ordinarily they might pass by and not recognize as suspicious or criminal behavior or preparation for that. With a little insight, they become to recognize those things. And then it's a way for them to become an additional set of eyes and ears for the department and report kind of activity more readily to us. And then we, in turn, take the appropriate actions or efforts to change. Maybe it's a physical issue with the environment. Maybe it's merely talking to some young kids in the neighborhood that have kind of created a sense where it's not safe for some older people in the community. It's also a way for them to get to know their neighbors, because that's one of the things that people move in and out of communities so regularly that they don't get to know their neighbors in a way where there's a sense of community within the neighborhood. So.
You're listening to South Fork Law. Our special guest tonight is Chief Clifford Cook of the Bellingham Police Department. Police departments are made up of people.
Yes.
What makes a good police officer?
Beyond the obvious qualifications, education, some maturity, maybe some life experiences, those sorts of things that we all look for, all departments look for. For us, it's about fit, and not a physical fitness way, but fit in how well does that individual fit within our organization? How well do they grasp and embrace the philosophy of how we see policing services provided? How do they perceive their role in the community or in society in general? And if they have the right fit, that they're the type of individual they think fits with our organization, then we're going to provide them with the additional training and experience to help them mold them into the type of officer we want.
Well, one of the things that has seemed different to me over the years about Bellingham is that you have better educated officers working in your department than I see in other agencies. It seemed to me that you had more officers with college in their background.
We do. We have an expectation that they have the equivalent of about 60 hours worth of college. That's fluctuated over the years from time to time. It is a benefit. However, there's also a detriment. If we hire someone with an advanced degree, for instance, they come into a police organization such as ours with pretty high expectations of maybe their career, their future career. And we're a small agency in comparison to most. Consequently, the ability for upward mobility within the ranks, as well as the opportunity to experience some different assignments, are limited. So sometimes that creates some frustrations for someone that's put the time and effort in a bachelor's degree or a master's degree, because they would like to see more opportunities. So we try to make adjustments for that. But it's we encourage our officers to go to college. We encourage them to seek advanced degrees. But coming into policing, I think somebody with a couple of years of college and some good sound characteristics and the right attitude is what we're looking for.
Is diversity important to the force? And if so, why?
Extremely important. One, it's it's got the obvious benefits for the community looking into the department to see people like themselves if they're from the minority community. I think there's a belief, and to some extent it's true, that citizens believe that officers of the same ethnicity or race have a better understanding of how people feel. For us, it brings in the diversity we need internally to help us understand different cultures and ethnicities and races. But I think it also helps develop officers who have not had the opportunity to interact with people of different color or nationality or lifestyle. And I think by having those types of individuals in the organization is viable, very much family, we like to refer to it as members, that it resolves a lot of the issues that some other departments are facing.
With use of force issues in the news these days, we'd like to know a little bit, if you can tell us about Bellingham, the Bellingham Department's philosophy with respect to use of force.
Well, I can tell you that it's my impression and my observations of our officers that there is a greater propensity to want to communicate with people as opposed to merely step into a situation and resolve it through arrest. Well,
start telling them what to do. What to do.
And a desire to help the individual they're dealing with understand why it is the officer would like them to do something or not do something. we've made some investments in training on de-escalation training, so our officers have the ability and are very much aware of the benefit of those training programs as well as the techniques we teach. But unfortunately, there are times when they have to implement force. But I think the officers tend to have a great level of restraint. None of us really want confrontation. But when it's necessary, we need to train our officers on how to handle someone physically without causing injury, but at the same time affecting a custodial arrest when it's necessary. I have not, in this department, met an officer who I would have concerns about. Because I've met some officers in my career who,
A little
at
hot.
other places, well, they have that kind of attitude about. They kind of look forward to confrontation, physical confrontation, and I've been fortunate in my career, nearly 40 years, where I've never had to fire my weapon in the line.
Right.
Been shot at, been assaulted, been at the hospital for injuries I received, but fortunately I've never had that issue. But I've had close friends that have, and I've seen, for an individual, that's not what they ever imagined having to do, even as a police officer. It's a tremendous thing for them to go through.
From your observation, how does that affect somebody when they've had to use force and it's turned out to be lethal?
I think it's all the obvious, questioning the decision-making process, questioning was there something else that could have been done, knowing the impact that death has had on another family and other individuals. And then it changes the officer to some extent because as a human being, even when you're placed in a position where you may be legally justified and even morally justified, the impact is still there. It's still a devastating thing to take a human life. I've known officers to say, I'm glad I'm still here to be with my family and my kids, but still regret having had to make that decision.
Well, as the public listens to these stories play out in the national news, what part of this story do you think is not being told in the national news?
Oh, there are a number of things. I think how officers are trained. Unfortunately, most of the public don't understand our training. I was at a community meeting here a week ago, and an African American gentleman who's a leader in this community who I've met before and was at the meeting, and had described how his community feels they need to teach young men what not to do and what they should do or how they should behave when they're contacted by a police officer, for instance, on a traffic violation. And he described what they taught their sons. And he felt that was an indicator of how unfortunate it is that they have to do that because of the fear factor. When it was an opportunity for me to describe how I was brought up in the Detroit area, and my father told me the same thing. And my father's from the South, but he understood the urban environment I was growing up in, and as a driver, what could potentially happen. And then I described to him, that's the very same thing I do. Not from the perspective of necessarily coming from a minority group per se, but I also know as a police officer what another officer is looking for, what they're going to perceive as a threat. So I do some of the same things. I turn the dome light on if it's in the evening. I've got my hands on the steering wheel. I don't make any quick, unexpected moves. And if I'm going to reach in a glove box, I tell the officer what I'm reaching for. And that's not necessarily, in my opinion, an indicator that officers want to intentionally have those kind of encounters, but it's the way we're trained because it's ingrained in us from early on that sometimes decision-making has to be made in a matter of fractions of a second, or otherwise you're not going home at night.
Well, who should review an officer's use of force? In our community, we haven't historically used a grand jury process. We've sometimes used, what is it called, a coroner's jury?
Coroner's juries have been used, special inquiries have been used.
But what do you think is the appropriate way for the community to review an officer's decision to use force?
Well, I've worked in both states where the grand jury system was the means where those shootings were reviewed, and then now in Washington where it's done in a different method, either by the prosecuting attorney's office or through a coroner's inquiry if it's, I think it's smaller counties do that in the state. And frankly, both processes have some, I guess you could say, criticisms. And I don't know of one particular methodology that is without criticism. I think we're hearing about problems people have with the grand jury system in Missouri and in New York. But I've also heard in my career criticisms of when it's done by strictly a prosecuting attorney alone. I think there has to be some other things that occur. I think there has to be a greater level of understanding of what police work is like, how decisions are made, what legally the officers can do, what policy by individual department allows. And then I think there needs to be some public involvement at minimum in seeing what's reported and how that decision, whether or not it was a justifiable shooting or not, was made. I'm concerned about some of the other areas of the country where they've used civilian review boards and they've done minimal training with those civilian board members, so they don't, in the perception of the officers, they don't sense that there's a balance to it. It, I think, also has to be an issue that the local community suggests what they think should happen. Because, frankly, American policing is based in the local community. It's not a national system or a...
Well, so what would you suggest would be a good way to begin a conversation in our community about this topic? Like, how should we start to talk about it?
Well, and this came up at the meeting I mentioned last week, and we need as a department to reach out more. But we need to have the community involved and get to know us more, know what our roles are and how we train and why we train the way we do, and have a better understanding of what the difficulties an officer faces when they go out on routine patrol. No patrol is truly routine. Right. Because without that level of understanding, I don't think anybody can truly evaluate whether an officer's actions were appropriate or not. You can write policy and you can have law, you can even have best practices, but unless all of those things are fully communicated and understood by the community, when issues like or incidents like Ferguson happen, there are automatic assumptions made on both sides that are incorrect and not accurate.
Well, thank you very much, Chief Cook, for coming to talk to us tonight. And I look forward, perhaps in the future, to talking with you or somebody else from the department about how officers are trained and maybe getting that out there so that people understand better what's going on.
That would be a great opportunity I'd like to take advantage of.
Well, thanks very much. You've been listening to South Fork Law. We've had a great episode with Chief Cook of the Bellingham Police Department. Please look for us on our Facebook page under South Fork Law. I'd like to thank our engineer, Robert Clark, as always, for doing a bang-up job. And we hope you find some justice out there.